Asato ma sadagamaya tamaso homaham jyotirgamaya mrityormam amritam gamaya avir ahavir maedhi rudra yate dakshinam mukham te namaham pahanityam. Om. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality, and reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. So my subject this morning is karma and reincarnation. These are paired concepts. That is, one entails the other. They go together like a horse and a carriage. So let's start by looking here at karma. Karma just means self-conscious, free will, volitional, moral, human action. The law of karma is a law which corresponds to the universal law of causation and Newton's third law of action. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And the example given in ancient times was that of a hunter who was out in the forest. He had his bow and he had his arrows. And he had a quiver of arrows on his back. One arrow had already been shot. It was flying through the air. Another was on the bow. Now, these are three types of karma. And this doctrine, that is, we're talking now about the law of karma, the first part of our subject, is all about freedom and responsibility. Freedom means is that you are a free will moral agent. You have the arrow in the present moment. You have an action which you're going to do. That's like the arrow which is on the bow. And that is in the circle of your control. You can choose to shoot or not, to aim it one way or another. And in fact, every moment, every day, we come to multiple forkings in the garden of forking paths. We have to choose between the prayas and the shreyas, that is the good and the pleasant. We have to make a decision about which way we're going and make a free will decision about which way we're going to go, which will determine our destination. We can't do anything about the arrow which already is flying in the air. That's in the past. And we can't do anything either about those arrows which have accumulated in the quiver on the back, which, as we will see, are really just the hunter's own arrows, which have come around and the consequences have returned to him in the end. So this is about freedom and about responsibility. There are two sides of the same coin. Responsibility means is that you are, that is, every action which you do with intention, that is with volitional action, which is a karmic action, that's an intentional action, has normative force. That means it connects with you, and that is it's reasonable, and it's logical for you to take the blame or to get the credit. That action to be connected to you, for which you are responsible. Now let's look a little more closely at that, how that works. Every action that we do, it has a moral valence, you see. And every action that we do has two effects. One is direct and immediate. It changes us. It changes our character. The second is indirect, delayed, and cycles around outside in the world to return to us like a boomerang. Now let me give you an updated, modern example of the hunter and the bow and arrow. Let's say we have another hunter who has a high-powered deer rifle, and he's out hunting looking for deer. And he's in the forest. He sees some movement up there in the trees. He raises that heavy rifle to his shoulder, he aims, and he pulls the trigger. Now the pulling of that trigger is an act of karma. As a result of that, two things happen. One is that this high-powered rifle is going to kick back onto your shoulder. And if you're not used to using it, it may even leave a little bruise on your shoulder. That happens immediately. Similarly, every action that we do, immediately it affects our character. It's just like the blow of a sculptor who's carving in stone. He hits the chisel with one hammer, then a little piece of the sculpture is increased. So that's the effect, which is immediate and direct and personal. But then what about the bullet? The bullet is now flying through the air. And let's say that instead of what he thought was a deer actually turns out to be the neighbor's cow. And the farmer, comes over there, he sees what's happened, and he's angry and enraged, and he calls the police. Pretty soon we hear the police sirens are come, and the policeman arrests the hunter for shooting the cow. So you see how that the consequences of his action kind of cycled around outside and returned to him. The results returned to him. So these are the two aspects of the action. One is about character. The other is about justice. So let's look first here at this part about character. Every time you do an action, that is, you're prompted, a desire arises to think, to speak, to behave, to do something. That action leaves an impression in the psyche. It's called a samskara. It's not a memory. It's different from a memory. But it's like a living image. It's like a signature, a warp signature or something. It's a bundle of energy which is working now in the psyche. It's like alive. It's like a ghost. It's just down there. It's just waiting. It's like a little seed. That's called samskara. And what will happen is that in the course of time passes, when you find yourself again in a similar situation, that little ghost is going to rise again. He wants to manifest himself and will prompt you to have a similar desire or an aversion two sides of the same coin, to act in a similar way. And it's this way that we build up our habits. This is called what Dr. Sigmund Freud called repetition compulsion. And therefore, once you go through the forest you've never been through before, you'll leave footprints. The tendency will be the next time you go through, you're going to follow your footprints. Pretty soon your little trail you can more easily follow. That's like a habit. Now you have a habit. It's like a little cycle. It's like a little circle of a link of a chain, we could say. And if each action is like a cycle, desire, impression prompts you to act, leaves an impression, prompts you to act, that's a cycle. That's a link in a chain. All these links in the chain together form habits. And these habits themselves take on a life of their own. And they group together. Birds of a feather flock together. So they're similar in our psyche. Habits which are all in the same category group together and reinforce, and they become a tendency. They become a disposition. We call it a vasana. That means a disposition, a generalized disposition to act in a certain way that's the result of many different smaller habits that we've accumulated and developed. Now we have a longer chain. Now these links of this chain are binding together, and they're forming segments, and then they're forming chains. And these are the chains which bind us. This is why in spiritual life, when we talk here about freedom and liberation from what? Well, we're talking about, in this context, karma. We're talking about liberation from the bondage of karma. That is, from these links. Now, all of these tendencies then continue in our unconscious. They themselves together form what we call a tendency, or a disposition, becomes a trait. And so we have personality traits, and we have deeper character traits, which are the result of the vasanas. And they in turn have their effect. And there's an old Buddhist verse that says, sow a desire, you reap an impression. Sow an impression, you reap a habit. Sow a habit, you reap a tendency. Sow a tendency, you reap a trait. And those traits together form what is your character. And your character, you sow a character, you reap a destiny. So this is how the law of karma helps us to understand why we are what we are. It's because of our own self-conscious, volitional actions. We formed and shaped ourselves. We've made ourselves. Now let's look at the second part of this. Remember, we said that this is not just about character, but it's also about justice. This is a great law of justice. Law of karma is the law of justice. And that is, whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. What goes around comes around. And this idea of justice is part of another great metaphysical law, the law of balance. That is, everyone gets, what is balance? Balance means is that everything is in the universe. This is the world of Maya. In Maya, everything eventually returns to equilibrium and balance. And here, in terms here of moral justice, justice here just means what is fair. And fair means, what does it mean to be fair? Fair means giving everyone what they deserve. And so this is a law. The law of karma maintains that everyone gets what they deserve. And that life is fair in the long run. We're going to look at that a little later. Now, it used to be, okay, but it used to be that in ancient times, and we're thinking maybe particularly in ancient Greece, where we get a lot of our thought and vocabulary, they believed, for example, that things, that there really, there is no law of justice. The things happen because the gods want them, feel like having arbitrarily decide that they'll happen. And we have the sister's fate. We have 3 sisters. One of them, she measures out, she's spinning a thread, and she spins out the thread. She has a second sister, and she measures out the thread of a life, a person's life. And the third sister arbitrarily cuts that thread wherever she feels like it. And so like this, our life, our very life, our course of our life, the beginning and end, it's all kind of determined by the fickle will here of the sister's fate. They also believed, ancient Greeks, this is in the goddess of fortune. We know her. She's blindfolded, juggling the 3 balls there. One is always in the air. And that's the wheel of fortune. It goes round and round. Where it stops, you don't know. It's only she knows. She's the goddess of fortune. She's blindfolded. She doesn't really know what she's doing. So like this, they believed in fate, in fortune, and in luck. See, the doctrine of karma knocks these ideas on the head. This is not the way, this is not in alignment with this philosophy. This philosophy is all about law. We live in a, I'm just telling you what is the orthodox teaching. You see if you believe it. Maybe you don't believe it. We live we don't live in a chaos. We live in a cosmos. Things don't happen in the universe just by random selection. Anything, you hear sometimes, anything can happen. No, anything can't happen. What happens is what has to happen. What will happen, what is determined to happen. There are laws. Now, we know there are man-made laws, and there are natural laws, but then there's other higher laws which we can't understand, which are beyond our reason, beyond the limits of reason. They're metaphysical laws, they're divine laws, there's laws of the psyche. These are all invisible. And we may think some of this looks like crazy. It looks like chance, looks like random, it looks like magic. That's because we don't understand the higher technology. One of these laws is the great law of balance, or we call it the great law of karma. And that states that things don't happen by fate. They happened by virtue of the law of karma. And that karma is your own self-conscious volitional action. And therefore, in the long run, what happens to you, and the way your life turns out, the way your life unfolds, is due to your own action. But we can see also it's not absolutely free. You're not when we say you're free, when we talk about free will here, we're not talking about the free will of the French existentialists, because we're also talking about justice. That is, freedom entails responsibility. So you're not completely free because you are responsible for everything that you've done in the past. And the consequences of all that you have done and your choices have now cycled around and are now beginning to manifest in this life. And these are the arrows that are in the quiver on your back. These are the things, the events now that are coming up in your life. They're all ready. They're lined up. They're ready to appear. And then you have to deal with them, each one. And it's kind of fixed. It's determined. But it's different from fate, because fate maintains that you are determined by somebody else. That you're determined by the gods. That you're determined by the will of, by the laws of nature, or by forces of society and culture outside yourself. Whereas this law maintains that yes, you are determined, but you are self-determined. So what we have here now is a doctrine of self-determination. Now, how does this happen? You can say how does this boomerang go out in the world and return? How does that? What's the mechanism? To that we can say, well, in the first place, in the case of the hunter, it's kind of obvious, because this law is kind of baked into the social consciousness, and it's embodied in our justice system. So that explains why, in fact, it explains why that happened. Other things, however, that we do are not so easily explained. Things that happen in our lives are not so easily explained. Another example would be that is psychological causation, which is not visible to us. It's not, it may be not even conscious of how it's working in our lives. And you remember the famous novel of Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment. And how the perfect crime, he committed Raskolnikov, he committed the perfect crime. And yet, how did it happen? But in the end, he was found guilty. The workings of his own mind, how his own mind constructed reality to manifest the results, which you would think that can never happen. A psychological. But in addition to that, there are many other things in our lives which are not psychological. Things which we think, they happen to us by chance, or they happen just by maybe we can question them. We often really don't question them. It's just life. We think it's just life. But maybe do things sometimes. There's a thing which is called, like we could call it, Jung called it synchronicity. That is, sometimes there are coincidences in our lives which are like incredible coincidences. We can't explain it. How can you explain it? Now, one explanation is the law of karma. And I remember a story that I read in the newspaper. So it must be true. It's in the newspaper. About a guy in Honey Grove, Texas. Now, this was long ago. And his head name was Henry Zealand. And he was a rancher. He had a little ranch there in Texas. He was a man of notorious bad character. But he had arranged to marry this girl. And on the very day of the wedding, there she came with all her relatives, and everyone came into the church, and she's standing there. But Zealand never showed up. He just changed his mind. He just left her there. And she was so devastated and so mortified at what had happened that she, the very next day, committed suicide. Now, she had a brother, and the brother who saw all this happening was outraged. And he decided to set the record straight, balance the books. And so he took his guns and he went off to the Zealand ranch. And he came up, cycled around up on a little hill there, overlooking there, and there he was working out in the fields, Henry Zealand. And the brother aimed his rifle and shot. Now, the bullet, he was standing right next to an oak tree. The bullet zipped past his head and buried itself in the oak tree. Zealand didn't even kind of know what happened, but he startled. He kind of fell to the ground. And the brother, from far off, he thought that he'd killed him. And he, being a moral man, thought he'd committed a mortal sin. And so he suicided himself. So now we have two deaths. Two people have been killed as a result, kind of as a consequence of the actions of this Henry Zealand. Time passed. He lived happily for many years. But then one day he was out in a field. He saw that this oak tree needed to be cleared to make room for the crops. He couldn't dig it up. He couldn't cut it down. So he went and got some dynamite. And he put the dynamite under the roots of the tree, buried it under there with a long fuse, went back a long way back and by a little hill, set that fuse, burned, explosion. The tree blew up, was uprooted from the ground, but by the force of that explosion, it dislodged the bullet that was in the bark of that tree and sent that bullet flying through the air and hit Henry Zealand square right between the eyes. Well, that's what we would call poetic justice. Yeah. It's like an incredible coincidence, yeah? No. Students of the law of karma say that's the way it happens. Great law of justice. Now, let's shift gears a little bit. We were talking here about the law of karma, Our subject is karma and reincarnation. So now let's look at reincarnation. Because karma is like an axiom, and one of the first corollaries is this doctrine of reincarnation. And one entails the other. Reincarnation really is all about, based on the idea that you are a divine immortal soul. And that your life does not end with the death of your physical flesh and blood body, but that there is life. That's not the end of your life. There's life after life, and there was life before life. And what we call a single lifetime is more like a chapter in a book. And that chapter has a literary, that discourse has a larger context. There's a before and there's an after. Part of a larger cycle. See, this law of karma, there's another law. See, all these laws work together. They're all reinforcing each other. That's why you can't just pick and choose. Because they all kind of you pull one thread and they all come together. Another one of the great laws here is the fundamental law of Eastern wisdom, the great law of cycles. Everything moves in circles. Similarly is with all life forms. Every life is a cycle. There's this great cycle of life, which we know. How the tree grows and bears the fruits and the flowers and the seeds, and they fall to the ground, and again the acorns grow in another tree. Similarly, it's called recycling. That's what reincarnation is. Everything does it. Similarly is with ourselves. We recycle ourselves. Why? Well, to continue on with the life purpose, to continue unfolding the law of cause and effect, the progression. For every cause, there's a corresponding effect. There's no effect without a cause. That's the fundamental universal law. And similarly, there's no the effect will have its cause. And therefore, if the books are not balanced in one life, then they have to be balanced in the next life. Because this is all about balancing the assets, the debits, and the assets. So this is reincarnation. Now, why believe in reincarnation? Well, first thing, it makes sense. It's a doctrine that's taught to us by the scriptures, right? So that means, in Indian philosophy, Vedanta philosophy, we believe that the knowledge that we get from scriptures is also knowledge. It's just like scientific knowledge, only it's knowledge about metaphysical things. So we have knowledge. Is there an afterlife? That's a metaphysical, philosophical question. You can't answer it logically. You can't reason it out. But how do you know? You know it because we learn it from the scriptures. We learn it from the revelation. The revelation teaches us that that we have a divine immortal soul. How do you know you have a divine immortal soul? You learn about it from the scriptures. That's one proof. That's one source of knowledge. So that's one we have to think a bit to wrap our brains about it. Say, well, I don't know. I don't believe in the scripture stuff. But this is part of the argument. The doctrine of reincarnation. Why believe in it? Well, another reason to believe in it is that it's a good theory. It's a good theory. It explains a lot of things that are left unexplained, puzzling, ties up a lot of loose ends. And that's nobody can figure out. Why is it? Now we're thinking now about moral law, the universe, the world around us. We look around us, we say there's a great law of justice, and yet we look around us and we see that, some people, why is it that some people are born with a silver spoon in their mouths and other person is born with it in dire poverty? It seems so unfair. It seems so unjust. These are the questions now arise in our minds. If we don't have, in the course of one, if we believe that we have only one life, we're baffled. We can't answer that question. But if we begin to see as a larger picture, sometimes in San Diego, if you go along you walk on a street in San Diego, and you see sometimes there are paintings there by a Mexican artist. His name was Diego Rivera. He used to do wall murals. That is a painting that will span the block, half a block long. And so you're walking along the sidewalk, maybe next to one of these, and you turn and you look at it like this, and all you can see is a red blotch, red spot, patch, a red patch. You can't understand. What is that? But if you step back a few feet, if you cross the street and you look at it from across the street, then you see the whole picture emerges. Oh, that's the color of this guy's shirt. And the shirt, he's driving a cart. The cart is being pulled by a horse and they're going somewhere. Like this, a whole story. You see the whole context. It all makes sense. That's why perspective enables us to make sense out of life. Things we can't understand. Here we have a law, the idea being that the law of karma gives us another dimension, another possibility for us to bring some order into our lives and understanding about why things happen. Why is it, for example, that things you have two children maybe born in the same, you maybe have identical twins. And they're born and they have the same DNA, basically. The same nature, heredity. And then they grow up in the same family. And so they have the same nature, nurture, they go to the same school. And in their early formative years, they are always together. But then time passes. And maybe later on in adulthood, we find that they become radically different people. They have radically different personalities. And their character traits are so dissimilar. Now, why is that? That would be baffling to modern day psychologist who needs to explain everything by formative childhood influences and social and cultural conditioning. If it's not that, and if it's not heredity, and it's not, then we're kind of baffled as to how to explain it. But there's another dimension, and that is the time frame. Similarly, we can say, why is it that there are stories about child prodigies? You've read some of these stories, maybe you read the life of somebody like Mozart or Brahms or somebody, Bach. 4 years old. He sits down, the piano starts playing the piano. And they have an amazing facility to acquire skills that that ordinary people would have to learn after many years of practice to learn. They just they have kind of what we could call old knowledge. It's a young kid, a child prodigy. It's just a young person who has very old knowledge. You don't know where it came from. And so reincarnation helps us to kind of give us this perspective. It's part of his past, part of the past chapters which are invisible to us. So this, I'm just giving some reasons here, why the reincarnation, because it explains some baffling things, puzzling things about life. For example, things about our own dispositions. You know, there are people who like the sea, this ocean, the seashore. Ask them where they would like to retire. Oh, I'd love to have a house on the beach. But you ask other people, no, he said, I'm not interested in that. I'd like to have a cabin in the mountains. Another person, no, it isn't. No, I'd rather have a high rise there downtown in the big city. Another person, I'd rather choose. He would choose to live in the desert. Loves the desert. And why is that? Why is it people have natural kind of a disposition to generally to choose things one likes and dislikes, generalized likes and dislikes. And you remember that in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, he tells about the young prince. The prince was playing with his other boys of the neighborhood. And they all, what are we going to play? Oh, they want to play soccer. They want to play baseball. And the prince says, no, he says, I have a better idea. Why don't we go down there by the river Ganges? Why don't we just go down to the river and we'll each take our cloths and we'll dip them in the water of the river. And then we'll swing the cloth and we'll hit the cloth on these flat rocks. And we'll hear it go whap, whap like that. Won't that be fun? And the other kids look at him and say, what? Yeah, but he's the prince. So they say, okay. Pretty soon all the kids are doing that, following him. He's having a great time. That's called disposition. Why is that? Well, previous life, he was the son of a washerman. That's how washermen used to wash the clothes back in the old days. Just dip the cloths in the water, and hit it against the rock, dislodge the dirt. They kept off clean cloths. So it was familiar. It was something that was familiar and comfortable for him to do. Furthermore, there are people who remember their previous lives. In the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says to Arjuna, he says, you don't remember any of these, your past lives, do you? He says, but I remember them all. He said, I remember all my past lives. Lord Buddha, we know, reading about his past life, they're called the Jataka tales, 500 stories about the past lives of the Lord Buddha. So sometimes people remember. Sometimes it's a kind of a common feeling that everyone has occasionally. Maybe you go into a strange city, you've never been there before. and you're walking along the street and you turn the corner and you have a fleeting sense everything looks familiar. You know where that store is, and this, what is that you walk, yes, I understood. I walk into the door and you understand, yeah, things are here and things are there. Everything seems familiar. The French called it déjà vu, kind of a wisping, passing. It's just a fleeting sense that I've been here before. Things have happened this way before. We've traveled this way before many times. This is the great law of cycles. We're going round and round in circles. Yes, we've been done the similar round before. So let me tell you a true story about people remembering. It's a very old story from Bengal. It was about a Bengali businessman who was he was a successful, respected businessman, and what nobody knew is that he had earlier on in this very life, he had been, in fact, a notorious dacoit, a highwayman. And when he was young, he would that was his that was what he would do. He would waylay merchants on the way into the city, and he would rob them, beat them, and rob them. And on one occasion, a father and his son with a wagon came along that way, and there was stopped by this robber, and there was an altercation, and he killed the young son, and he beat the father and stole that wagon of goods. Now the father, of course, somehow very soon, he was destitute. He died of a broken heart. But time passed, and that highwayman, he had a kind of a change of attitude. He thought he's going to turn over a new leaf. And so he gave up his old ways. And he had money, so he moved to a new part of town, and he started a business, and he built a life for himself, living a very respectable life. And he got married, and he had in course of time, a son was born to him. And that boy was the pride and joy of his life. He loved his son more than anything in the world. And time passed, years passed. One day, when that boy was about 4 years old, he fell ill. And they called the doctors, came, nobody could figure out what was wrong. The boy got worse and worse. Till one day, finally, he deteriorated, and he was on his deathbed, lying there. And in a feeble voice, he called to his father. He said, "Father, can I ask you a question?" Father came over. "Yes, yes." And the boy, whispering, asked him in his ear, he said, "Do you remember that merchant who you killed long ago? You robbed him. You killed his son." And the father is stunned and amazed to see, how did you know? Well, you knew this. The boy looked at him in his eyes and said, "I am that merchant." And so the father, well, with those words, he died in his father's arms. And so the father is brokenhearted. His life is ruined. And so, that's the great law of karma, how things return to us in the end. That's karma and reincarnation. Reincarnation just means not just reincarnated one time, one life, then maybe we have 2 lives, we have 3 lives. No, it's cause and effect. It's cyclic. The chains, it's like the chains of an anchor. You turn the wheels of the anchor, turn it after raising the anchor. All the links come together. So all of these links they're in a cycle. And it's all the chain of causation moves in a cyclic form, like a Ferris wheel or like a carousel. There's no beginning. We don't know when was our first life because great law of causation. There's no first life. You can't just materialize out of nothing. There's always a previous conditioning cause. And then there's no end. So it's no beginning and no end to karma, the great law of karma. That's the great cycle. It's called the great wheel of samsara. A common trope in all the philosophies of the wisdom of the East. This is our bondage. The great wheel, fueled by desire and by attachment, by ignorance, gives rise to attachment, gives rise to desire and aversion, clinging to life. This is what powers and turns the wheel, goes round and round. And this is the human predicament. So that's our subject this morning, karma and reincarnation. The two go together, like the horse and the carriage. You can't have one without the other, really. One completes and fulfills the other. It explains the other. And it's a very helpful module for us to have in our philosophy of life. Om Dyo Shantihi Antariksha Shantihi Prithvi Shantihi Apa Shantihi Oshadaya Shantihi Vanaspataya Shantihi Vishwe Deva Shantihi Brahma Shantihi Saravam Shantihi Shantireva Shantihi Same Shantiredhi Om Shantihi 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 Om, peace is in heaven, peace is on the earth, peace is in the sky and in the waters. The herbs and plants and trees are full of peace. The gods are peaceful. May this eternal universal peace enter our souls and beings. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all.